this is a wonderful opportunity to spend a few minutes with you talking a little bit about what we're doing at IOSCO. And like James, I must say, there's no better place than to share a few ideas with those that think like we do. And I'm particularly buoyed, as is James, about the increased intensity that we've seen over the last few years with respect to these issues around sustainability, not only from policymakers, but from investors, from regulators, and from market participants more generally. And I think we're on a good path, and I'm hopeful that we're going to continue this discussion not only next year, but the year after and the year after that. So what are we seeing in the marketplace today? As James said, we're seeing a substantial increase in the number of sustainability-focused financial instruments, green bonds, social impact bonds, sustainability funds, energy investment funds. What are we seeing from institutional investors? We're seeing an increased focus on issues around disclosure and addressing ESG risks. There's a real interest there. What are we seeing from exchanges? As James said, we're seeing things like ESG indices, disclosures, sustainability indexes. There has been an incredible and substantial set of progress being made on these key issues that face us, our children, and our children's children. But what I'm also happy to say is, as James also referred to, you are now beginning to see an increased focus by capital markets regulators on these very same issues. You just have to look what's happening in places like Morocco, like Hong Kong, what's happening in the European Union. Policymakers in those places, but also capital markets regulators, have decided that this is an issue that must be addressed and must be addressed today. And that's the good news. I think the other piece of good news is that you're beginning to see even more public entities becoming more involved in these discussions, because the private sector, in my mind, can't do it alone. It needs impetus, it needs help, it needs incentive from the public sector. And that's also good news. So what I'd like to do just over the next few minutes is spend a little bit of time telling you IOSCO's contribution to these issues around sustainable finance. Some say that we came a little bit late to the program, but I think, as my mother used to say, better late than never. And I'm happy to talk a little bit about what we're doing. So there's two initiatives that I wanted to share a few minutes with you on. The first is something that our board approved just last week, and it's something we're calling a sustainability network. And the idea of the network is to be, from an enterprise point of view, the focal point within IOSCO of where we can have pointed and critical discussions around what's happening in the world of sustainable finance. So the network is at the board level, it's being chaired by a member of the board, and will be made up of a steering committee made up of board members. And I pause on that issue just for a moment, because the fact that it's at the board level indicates the seriousness with which IOSCO is taking this initiative. And what's the Sustainability Network supposed to do? And its mission is really three main things. The first is to take a bit of a stock take in terms of what's actually going on out there in the regulatory community in particular, about what regulators are doing to help incentivize or at least address issues around sustainable finance. We would like very much to get a lay of the land to see where capital markets regulators are spending their time today. That will help us form a foundation upon which to build. The second area of focus for the Sustainability Network is really to discuss among capital markets regulators what are the trends in this area, what's happening, what are the risks, what are the supply issues, what are the demand issues, and where can capital markets regulators be part of this discussion. And then the third focus area is to analyze what is happening out there to determine whether there's a role and scope for IOSCO to take additional action. And after we do that analysis, and if there's scope for us to act, what the Sustainability Network will do is develop a particular issue to its logical conclusion, bring it to the board for further action. That's the intention of what the Sustainability Network is trying to do. It's an enterprise-wide effort, and I think what it will do is bring together both emerged markets, developed markets, and emerging markets, all within the same discussion. The second initiative that I'm particularly proud of that we're addressing at IOSCO is something that's coming from our Growth and Emerging Markets Committee. It's one of the largest committees within IOSCO because the vast majority of IOSCO members, believe it or not, come from growth and emerging markets. Very important constituency for an organization like ours. And what the GEM Committee is trying to do is picking up on work that is addressing what the issues and the challenges are with respect to the development of sustainable finance products in emerging markets. What the GEM is doing is looking at this issue from a capital market development point of view. And what's interesting about that for us as an organization is that IOSCO does not have a mission of capital market development. But most, if not all of our members, particularly from the GEM countries, do. And this is a recognition of an important area where it's feasible for the growth and emerging markets countries to come together and think about this issue in a new way. And what it's trying to do is identify various different factors that contribute to or inhibit, frankly, the development of sustainability products, regulatory impediments, risks, and challenges for having this discussion within the emerging markets. So what the Emerging Markets Committee did was it took two steps. It first did a survey among its members to determine what's actually happening within the growth and emerging markets in this area. And after looking at the results of that survey, it basically found a couple of things. That there were two main impediments to developing these types of products in capital markets in emerging markets. A lack of investor demand, believe it or not, and a lack of consistent and coherent standards. Now, what the Growth and Emerging Markets Committee has chosen to do, there's not much it can do about lack of investor demand today, but what it can do is contribute, in its view, how to create consistency across markets with standards, recommendations, and guidance. And so that's what the survey said to us, to the leadership of the Growth and Emerging Markets Committee, that that's the role this committee can play, is to come up with some consistent standards around disclosure, around classification of what we mean by green products, of trying to create some principles for the incentives for markets to develop these types of these products in these markets. It's going to also serve as a basis for information exchanges and also serve as a way to deal with capacity building, something that we often take for granted, but something that we have to pay a great deal of attention to in IOSCO. So not only did it do the survey and come up with its results, but it took it a next step. It met then in London with a group of market participants, exchanges, regulators, to talk about the issues from their point of view. And the good news is that dialogue pretty much reaffirmed what we knew from the survey, that where the focus should be is around disclosures, around what role institutional investors can play, around data quality, and around capacity building. And so putting that all together, what the GEM is now going to do is come up with a grouping of recommendations and guidance that it's putting together in a consultation paper that it will issue within weeks, with the idea being getting feedback from the public in terms of how we are looking at this from a growth and emerging markets point of view, in terms of how do we play a role in the capital market development of small and emerging countries. And we think by doing that, it will assist emerging markets in thinking through how they want to approach it at a local level. Because at the end of the day, regulation is local, but can be informed by global standards. And by doing what we're doing in the Growth and Emerging Markets Committee, what we think we will be able to do is bring a sense of consistency, a sense of harmonization, and find a way to assist both investors and issuers, particularly given how these issues cross borders and impact all of us. There's a lot more I can say about these issues. I'm passionate about these issues. I think we are moving in the right direction. I know we have a lot to get to, but I appreciate the opportunity to spend a few minutes telling you a little bit about what we're doing, and I hope in the sidelines of the rest of today and the rest of the week we have a chance to expound on some of the things that I've mentioned here this afternoon. So thank you very much.